Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel, Money Media, James here. Today I want to run through supply and demand, and I'm going to be doing some drawing just to keep us up to speed and offer a bit of a visual to explain what I'm going through during the process. So stick with me, it's going to take a few minutes. We're talking about supply and demand. Now, before I get into it, supply and demand basically underpins everything within an economic system. So it is really important to understand whether you are a business owner, you're somebody who invests, or you just want to have a better understanding about the market and how everything works in the financial system. So we're going to get straight into it. And how we're going to do that is we're going to draw a supply and demand schedule. And with this, we need an X and Y chart, which is one of my favorite charts, by the way. With an X and Y chart, we start with a vertical line and then a horizontal line. This axis, the horizontal axis, is known as the X axis. The vertical is known as the Y. Just as a side point, I always thought it was really weird in English-speaking countries that we use the X as the horizontal and the Y as the vertical, because we actually read from left to right, up till down. So my opinion is that should be the X axis. But we'll leave that for another video. So in this particular graph, the supply and demand schedule, the vertical axis represents the price per unit. The horizontal axis represents the quantity of units. Now, often when a supply and demand schedule is explained, people often will use the supply curve to start the explanation. I'm going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to go with the demand curve first, and that's because I think it's easier to explain and easier to grasp. So the demand curve looks like this on the supply and demand schedule. And I'm just going to put a D to represent demand. Now we're going to use a little example today of haircuts. Nice and simple. Everybody knows them in the market and is familiar with a haircut, right? And there's always demand, which is super important. So on this price per unit axis, I'm going to go ahead and put $60. Halfway down, I'm going to put $40. And down at the bottom, I'm going to put 20. Now what this represents is the cost of a haircut or a hypothetical haircut. Before we go any further, if you're wondering why it's called a demand curve and I've drawn a straight line, in the real world, generally these lines are curved, but for ease of explanation, I'm going to keep them straight. So what the demand curve represents is how many people within the market are willing to pay a certain price for that haircut. So there may be at 60 per haircut, there may be very few people willing to actually pay for that. Whereas if you come down here, if haircuts were to cost $20, the quantity demanded would be much greater. So that all seems pretty simple enough, fairly straightforward. What we're going to do from here is introduce the supply curve, which slopes up. S for supply. Now what this highlights is how many haircuts are able to be produced in the market at these different price points. So you can see down here at $20 a haircut, well, let's call that 1, 2, 3, and 4, only 2 haircuts are able to be supplied. That may be because at that price, nobody can actually offer a haircut. So in this example, one business might come in, offer a haircut for $20, able to offer 2 before they essentially go out of business. And that cycle would continue to reverse. Up here, at the higher mark, it's $60. You've got many suppliers willing to offer a haircut for that money because it's obviously much higher. But if you can see on the graph, at that cost of $60, there's very few people that actually will pay for that haircut. $60. So what we have in the middle here is the equilibrium price, which is really important. What it tells us is that enough suppliers in the market are able to supply a haircut to meet the demand. Now this will naturally crowd out some demand. So if you go back here with the demand curve, all these people in this section will actually not be willing to pay for that haircut. Now this may be because they cut their own hair and it's worth their time and money and effort to cut their own hair or their children's hair or whatever it may be until the price reaches below that $30, at which point it may be worth them getting somebody else to do it. Likewise, above that line of equilibrium, on the demand side, it means that all those people who are willing to pay $60, $50, $40 for a haircut are actually getting the haircut cheaper than what they would have otherwise paid. In economics, there's actually a name for this, and all the consumers are covered in a term called consumer surplus. It means they actually gain because they get the haircut cheaper than what they were anticipating or what they were willing to pay. Conversely, on the supply side, all the suppliers above this equilibrium point are not actually willing to provide a haircut for $30. So it means these suppliers within the market may not actually enter the market or may exit if they find the prices come down to that $30. Likewise, all the producers that lay below equilibrium point actually gain in the market because they were willing to charge much less for a haircut, but are able to charge this $30 mark. So now that we've got our head around supply and demand and the basics of how it all works, I'm going to introduce something else. Now, noting here that this was, or still is currently, our point of equilibrium, I want to introduce a change in the market, which happens very regularly. And I want to illustrate how that impacts the supply and demand schedule. Now, very relevant at the moment, and I'm going to talk about wages, something that we've all probably heard in the news or the media or what have you, especially at the moment, given the current economic environment. And I want to show you how a change in wages affects this graph. So let's say for whatever reason, wages fall, but by some freak miracle, the minimum wage is reduced. And let's assume that all hairdressers are on minimum wage. Some maybe, some maybe not. If wages reduce, that means that the cost of a haircut to the supplier goes down. So if the wages go down, the cost to the supplier goes down. So what does that do? If the cost to offer a haircut goes down, then that means that hairdressers are able to offer haircuts at a lower rate. Agree? And this is how this would look. This supply curve, because lower wages affects the supply side of the supply and demand schedule, this supply curve would actually shift to the right. Now, what does that do? If you want to take a look at our equilibrium point, and if I'm to draw a line both vertical and horizontally from that equilibrium point, we can see that the amount able to be offered increases against our prior equilibrium point, and the price at which we're able to offer that increased supply has also reduced, essentially $20. Now this is really important, and it highlights that everything that happens in the market, in the economy, affects businesses and consumers in a major way. What economics is based on is algebra. And I'm not going to go down that path for this video, it's a little bit too complex. But essentially, I was told early on when I was studying economics that if you don't understand algebra, you will never fully understand economics. It took me a couple of years to grasp that and figure out what he was actually talking about. What he was referring to was essentially the cause and effect relationship between everything that goes on in the economy. I could give you a really quick example. Housing prices. We've all seen within Australia and globally, in fact, recently, in the last few years, we've seen housing prices continue to go up and up and up. We also may have friends who are working in and around the housing industry, whether that be in construction, whether that be on the legal side of things, etc. We're finding that fees and everything, cost of living is going up, so their wages are going up. Now, if you've got a carpenter whose wages have doubled, what do you think that is going to do to the cost of a house? It's going to increase. So that's a very simple example, but every little change and every little alteration within the economy impacts at least one other thing, but more often than not, increases a multitude of things. And those things are then changed in another multitude of ways. So bringing it all back in, economics is essentially quite algebraic in nature. But what I wanted to highlight today, or get across to you, is that a change in one thing will almost always lead to a change in at least one other thing. So to bring that all back, and I hope what I've gotten across today is to outline that pricing in a market is really, really important. It's crucial to your business to understand how pricing affects the level of demand within your business and then across the industry as well that you may be in. All right, everyone, that's supply and demand in a nutshell. I hope that all made sense. Any further questions you may have, drop them in the comments. Can't wait to check them out. Thank you all. See you.